You've made your point. Walk away now if you know what's good for you. The text message glowed on my phone screen, its anonymous sender somehow more menacing for their lack of identity. I stared at it for a long moment, my reflection visible in the darkened screen when it finally went to sleep. A 52-year-old woman with tired eyes and a neat bun that didn't have a single hair out of place, even now. 3 weeks ago, I had been Margaret Maggie Sullivan, respected finance director at Fairview Holdings. Now I was Maggie Sullivan, whistleblower. Target. I took a screenshot of the threat and forwarded it to my attorney, Sarah Goldman. This wasn't just cooking books anymore. I had stumbled onto something bigger, something that powerful people would threaten me to keep hidden. The journalist sitting across from me at the cafe, Michael Reynolds, watched with undisguised curiosity. What was that? He asked, his eyes darting between my face and my phone. Confirmation, I replied, placing the phone face down on the table. That I'm looking in exactly the right place. Flashback, the breaking point. 3 weeks earlier, I sat across from Richard Parker in Fairview Holdings' executive conference room. Light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished oak table between us, a table where I'd spent countless hours reviewing financial reports, suggesting improvements, helping build this company into something I had once been proud of. You're either a team player or you're gone, Maggie, Richard said, his voice slicing through the silence. He slid the termination papers across the table with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your choice. I'd seen that smile before. My father had worked for 30 years at a manufacturing plant before being discarded when cheaper labor became available overseas. I remember his stunned expression when he came home that day, termination papers in hand. He'd given everything to that company, including his health. 6 months later, he was gone. A heart attack, they called it. But my mother and I knew better. It was a broken heart. That memory had stayed with me throughout my 30 years in accounting. It had shaped my professional ethics, my determination to stand up for what was right, regardless of pressure. It was the story I'd told my son Ryan when he was young, explaining why integrity mattered more than money. I won't falsify financial statements for the audit, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Not for you, not for anyone. Richard's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. Then I believe we're done here. Without another word, I signed the termination papers. No arguments, no pleas, no emotional outbursts. I simply picked up my pen and signed away 30 years of my career at Fairview Holdings. As security escorted me to clear out my desk, I felt the eyes of my colleagues following me through the open plan office. Some looked away, too uncomfortable to witness my disgrace. Others watched with undisguised curiosity. My assistant, Jessica Martinez, approached with tears in her eyes, but security stepped between us. Personal items only, the guard instructed as I emptied my desk drawer. I nodded, carefully placing framed photos, including one of Ryan at his high school graduation, my coffee mug, and a few books into a cardboard box. What they didn't know was that I had anticipated this moment. For months, I had been documenting every questionable directive, archiving incriminating emails, and taking screenshots of Slack conversations where executives discussed massaging the numbers and creative accounting for the upcoming audit. At the apartment, the war room, my downtown Hartford condo had always been my sanctuary, but that night it felt more like a war room. Spread across my dining table were printed copies of emails, financial statements, and meeting notes, physical backups of the digital trail I had meticulously preserved. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto my small balcony overlooking the city lights. The skyline of Hartford stretched before me, gleaming office buildings housing countless businesses. How many other companies were hiding similar secrets behind their gleaming windows? How many other accountants were facing the same impossible choice I had faced today? My phone rang, startling me. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. My son always seemed to have a sixth sense for when something was wrong. I took a deep breath before answering. Hey, Mom, his voice came through, warm and concerned. Just checking in. You usually call on Wednesdays, but I didn't hear from you today. I hesitated, not wanting to burden him with my problems while he was focusing on his studies at Massachusetts University. I'm fine, honey. Just a busy day. Mom, he said, his tone making it clear he wasn't buying it. What's wrong? Did something happen at work? I sighed, moving back inside to sit on the couch. I'm not at Fairview anymore, Ryan. As of today, the silence on the other end lasted a few seconds. They fired you? For what? For refusing to do something I knew was wrong. I kept my explanation simple, not wanting to get into the technical details of accounting fraud. Are you okay? Do you need me to come home? I can be there by tomorrow afternoon. His immediate offer to drop everything and come to me brought tears to my eyes, tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed all day. No, sweetheart. I'm okay. Really. What are you going to do? He asked. I glanced at my dining table covered with evidence. I'm going to do the right thing, I said, just like I always taught you to do. Even when it's hard? He responded, echoing the words I'd said to him countless times throughout his childhood. Especially when it's hard, I finished. After a moment, he said softly, Mom, I know you'll do the right thing. You always have. Those words settled something inside me. After we hung up, I returned to my dining table and pulled up the email I had drafted earlier that day, addressed to all 7 members of Fairview Holdings Board of Directors. I had crafted it carefully, no emotional language, no accusations, just the facts laid bare with dozens of attachments proving systematic financial misrepresentation ordered by Chief Financial Officer Richard Parker and supported by Chief Executive Officer James Harrison. The decision and its aftermath. My finger hovered over the send button as doubt crept in. Was I really prepared for the fallout? Once I pressed send, there would be no going back. I would be branded a whistleblower, respected by some, reviled by others. At 52, starting over wouldn't be easy. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. They're saying you resigned because you couldn't handle the pressure. Parker already interviewed your replacement. I felt a flare of anger, quickly replaced by resolve. Richard Parker had always underestimated me. He saw me as just another accountant, excellent with numbers but easy to intimidate. He didn't understand that precision and attention to detail weren't just professional skills for me. They were the foundation of who I was. I hit send. Within minutes, my email was sitting in the inboxes of not only the board of directors, but also Fairview's external auditors and legal counsel. The truth was out, and now all I could do was wait. I picked up the framed photo of Ryan and studied it. He had my eyes but his father's smile. Brian and I had been divorced for 8 years now, but our son remained the best thing we had ever done together. Life isn't a balance sheet, Maggie, Brian had said during our last argument. Perhaps he was right about life, but in accounting, precision was everything. And right now, precision was my only weapon. 6 years ago, I had joined Fairview Holdings with such optimism. The company had been smaller then, more focused on ethical investments and affordable housing developments. Over time, as profit margins became the only metric that mattered, something fundamental had changed. 3 months ago, when Richard first suggested adjusting our debt to equity ratios to attract a particular investor, I had expressed concern. He had laughed it off as standard industry practice. 2 months ago, when he instructed me to reclassify certain expenses to inflate our quarterly earnings report, I documented the conversation and quietly began gathering evidence. 1 month ago, when he ordered me to create a shell subsidiary to hide underperforming assets before the audit, I knew my days at Fairview were numbered. I just hadn't expected the end to come quite so abruptly. The response was faster than I anticipated. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I had received calls from 3 board members, including Chairwoman Catherine Montgomery, who had always struck me as the most ethically minded of the leadership team. We've called an emergency board meeting for noon, she informed me, her voice grave. The evidence you've provided is concerning, to say the least. Would you be willing to join us via conference call? The confrontation. The board has reviewed your materials, Ms. Sullivan. Catherine began after introductions were complete. We've also spoken with our legal counsel about next steps. But before we proceed, we'd like to hear directly from you about what transpired. For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through everything, from the first subtle suggestions to polish the numbers to the explicit demands to falsify data. I detailed Richard's growing pressure and eventual ultimatum that led to my termination. And you have documentation for all of this? Asked board member Gregory Patel, his tone skeptical. Every instance is documented with emails, meeting notes, or recorded conversations in accordance with Connecticut's one-party consent laws, I confirmed. I've been in accounting for 30 years, Mr. Patel. I understand the importance of evidence. The silence that followed told me everything. They believed me. But more importantly, they knew I had them cornered. If they didn't act on this information, they would be complicit. Thank you for your candor, Miss Sullivan, Catherine finally said. Please keep your phone nearby. Our legal team will be in touch. 3 hours later, I received an email notification for an urgent press release from Fairview Holdings. The statement announced the immediate suspension of Richard Parker and CEO James Harrison pending a full independent investigation into alleged financial improprieties. The company had also self-reported to the Securities and Exchange Commission and would be cooperating fully with any regulatory inquiries. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Jessica. The office is in chaos, she whispered. Security just escorted Parker and Harrison out of the building. People are saying the feds might get involved. Maggie, what did you do? I told the truth, I said simply. The meeting and the trap. The following morning, Fairview Holdings stock had dropped nearly 15% by the time I arrived for my meeting with Catherine Montgomery. The lobby of the company's headquarters, normally bustling with activity, was eerily quiet except for a few reporters lingering outside hoping to catch an insider for comment. Security brought me directly to the executive floor, the same floor I had been escorted from in disgrace just 2 days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. Catherine was waiting in the boardroom alongside two individuals she introduced as Terrence Walker from the firm's legal department and Josephine Alvarez, an attorney from an external law firm specializing in corporate compliance. Thank you for coming, Maggie, Catherine began. We've initiated a full-scale independent investigation, but the board felt it important to hear your perspective on how widespread these issues might be. Before we begin, Josephine interjected. I want to clarify that Ms. Sullivan is here voluntarily and should be treated as a whistleblower protected under federal law, not as a hostile party. I appreciated the attorney's directness, though I suspected her concern was more about limiting Fairview's liability than protecting me. Of course, Catherine agreed smoothly. Maggie, we value your 30 years of experience in financial compliance and hope you can help us understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. For the next hour, I walked them through the evolution of the accounting irregularities. How they had started small but grown increasingly brazen as external financial pressures mounted on the company. I explained how Richard had compartmentalized the deceptive practices, ensuring that different team members worked on isolated pieces so that no one besides him had the complete picture. No one except me, that is. As finance director, I was the nexus through which all financial information flowed. How many others do you believe were knowingly involved? Terrence asked, taking careful notes. Based on direct evidence, I can only confirm Richard Parker and James Harrison, I replied. Several others may have suspected, but Richard was careful to maintain plausible deniability for most of the team. Catherine leaned forward. Maggie, I'm going to be blunt. The board is prepared to offer you reinstatement with a substantial promotion and compensation increase. We need someone with your ethical standards and institutional knowledge to help us correct course. The offer caught me off guard. I had expected legal threats or perhaps a severance package with strings attached. Not this. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. But I'm not sure returning is the right move for either of us. Catherine looked surprised. She clearly wasn't accustomed to having her offers rejected. May I ask why? The compensation would be quite generous. I thought of my father. I thought of Ryan. I thought of everything I had ever taught my son about integrity. Because the problems at Fairview go deeper than Richard and James, I said. The board has received quarterly reports for years. You approved executive bonuses tied to financial metrics that, in retrospect, were clearly implausible. Either the board failed in its fiduciary duty of oversight, or some of you were aware and chose to look the other way. The room fell silent. Josephine shifted uncomfortably, while Terrence stopped writing entirely. That's a serious allegation, Catherine finally said, her voice tight. It's an observation based on the financial data, which is my area of expertise, I replied. And it's why I believe my credibility as a whistleblower would be compromised if I returned to Fairview's parole. As the meeting concluded without resolution, I noticed a notification on my phone, an email from the Securities and Exchange Commission requesting an interview. The federal investigation was officially underway, and I had just declined the company's attempt to bring me back into the fold. Walking out of Fairview for what I now knew would be the last time, I felt lighter. The path ahead was uncertain, but at least it was my own. The wider web present day, which brings me back to the calf, the threat on my phone, and the journalist sitting across from me. Elena, sorry, Maggie, Michael corrected himself, his pen poised over his notepad. You're comfortable with me quoting you directly on the timeline of events leading to your termination? I nodded, scanning the latest draft of his article on his tablet. Everything attributed to me is accurate, but remember our agreement. This interview is about corporate accountability, not personal vendettas. Absolutely, he agreed, taking back the tablet, though readers love a personal angle. Any interest in sharing how it felt to watch Fairview's stock drop 30% since the scandal broke? I sipped my coffee, considering my response carefully. I take no pleasure in watching a company I helped build suffer, Michael. Many honest employees are now facing uncertainty because of decisions made by a few. He looked disappointed but made a note. Fair enough. What about the second investigation? Sources tell me you've had multiple interviews with federal regulators. I can't comment on an ongoing investigation, I replied, the answer practiced and precise. Our conversation was interrupted by an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Maggie Sullivan speaking, I said, excusing myself from the table. Ms. Sullivan, this is David Chen, Chief Compliance Officer at Thornmere Financial. The name of one of Fairview's largest competitors immediately caught my attention. I was hoping we might meet to discuss an opportunity. I scheduled a meeting for the following day and returned to Michael, who was watching me with undisguised curiosity. Another job offer? He asked. That's the third one I've seen you take since we sat down. It was true. In the weeks since the scandal broke, I had received inquiries from multiple companies seeking financial compliance leadership. My reputation as the whistleblower who took down Fairview's executive team had made me simultaneously radioactive and highly desirable, depending on a company's priorities. Would you believe me if I said it was a cold call about my car's extended warranty? I joked. Michael laughed. Not for a second. His expression turned more serious. Maggie, there's something you should know before this article goes to print. I've uncovered evidence suggesting that Fairview's fraudulent practices may have direct connections to Redwood Capital Partners. I felt my blood run cold. Redwood was one of the largest private equity firms in the Northeast, with tentacles reaching into dozens of companies across multiple industries. What kind of connections? I asked, keeping my voice level. Financial flows that don't make sense, overlapping board memberships, and remarkably similar accounting irregularities, he explained. I think Fairview might be just the tip of the iceberg. If Michael was right, my actions had potentially uncovered something much bigger than one company's financial misdeeds. It also meant that some very powerful people might have reason to be concerned about what I knew or what I might discover. That's when the threatening text had arrived. The choice. The offices of Thornmere Financial occupied 3 floors of a sleek downtown tower with views of the Connecticut River. I was shown to a conference room where David Chen waited alongside Thornmere's CEO, Elizabeth Norton, and a woman introduced as Vanessa Washington, head of internal audit. Thank you for coming, Ms. Sullivan, Elizabeth began after pleasantries were exchanged. I'll get straight to the point. We've been following the Fairview situation with great interest, and frankly, we're impressed by your integrity. David nodded in agreement. In the current regulatory environment, companies like ours are under intense scrutiny. We need someone with both technical expertise and moral courage leading our compliance efforts. We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Compliance Officer, Elizabeth continued. The role would report directly to me, with full board access and a substantial budget for staffing your department as you see fit. The offer was unexpected, not just a job but a C-suite position with significantly more authority and compensation than I had ever had at Fairview. At 52, such opportunities were rare. That's very generous, I replied carefully. May I ask what prompted such a substantial offer to someone you've just met? Elizabeth and David exchanged glances. Honesty, Elizabeth admitted. Fear, not of you, but of being the next Fairview. The regulatory landscape is changing, and we need someone who can ensure we're not just compliant on paper. Also, Vanessa added, speaking for the first time, I reviewed your work when we competed with Fairview on the Westridge Development Project last year. Your financial models were impeccable. Talent like yours is rare. Their transparency was refreshing, but something still felt off. The offer was too perfect, too quickly extended to someone at the center of an ongoing scandal. Before I consider your offer, I said, I need to ask a difficult question. What is Thornmer's relationship with Redwood Capital Partners? The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Elizabeth's smile faltered ever so slightly, while David's posture stiffened. They're a minority investor in some of our development projects, Elizabeth answered carefully. Why do you ask? Because I've received information suggesting Redwood may be linked to the same financial irregularities I uncovered at Fairview, I replied, watching their reactions closely. And I've recently received what could be interpreted as a threat, warning me to stop investigating. Vanessa leaned forward, her expression grave. What kind of threat? I showed them the anonymous text message. This is concerning, David said after a moment. But I'm not sure what it has to do with our job offer. Everything, I counted. If I were to accept this position, I would need complete independence to investigate any potential issues, regardless of who they involve, including major investors. Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment before responding. Maggie, let me be candid. We're offering you this position because we want to ensure Thornmere doesn't become the next financial scandal headline. If you have concerns about Redwood, that's something we should know about. Or, I suggested, you already know about Redwood's practices, and you're offering me this position to keep me close and controlled. The silence that followed was telling. I think we're done here, I said, gathering my belongings. Thank you for your time. As I walked toward the elevator, David caught up to me. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. We genuinely need someone like you. Then prove it, I replied. Start by ordering a full internal audit of any projects involving Redwood, conducted by an independent firm with no ties to either company. When that's complete, we can talk again. I stepped into the elevator, leaving David looking thoughtful in the hallway. As the doors closed, I couldn't help but wonder, was I turning down a legitimate opportunity, or had I just narrowly avoided walking into a trap set by the very people I was now investigating? The vindication. The second investigation moved with surprising speed. 6 weeks after my initial whistleblower report, I sat in a federal building conference room alongside my attorney, Sarah Goldman, watching as Special Agent Dis laid out the charges being filed against Fairview's former executives. Richard Parker and James Harrison will be charged with securities fraud, filing false financial statements, and conspiracy, he explained. Based largely on the evidence you provided, Ms. Sullivan. Sarah nodded approvingly. And the board members? I asked. 2 board members, including former chair Catherine Montgomery, are being charged with failure to perform fiduciary duties and willful blindness, Agent Dis continued. The investigation into Redwood Capital is ongoing and complex. I understood the subtext. Redwood had powerful connections and armies of attorneys. That investigation would take much longer and face significant resistance. What happens now? I asked. Now we prepare for depositions and potential trial testimony, Sarah explained. And you consider what you want your next steps to be professionally. That question had been weighing on me. I had received no shortage of job offers. But after the Thornmere experience, I was wary of walking into another potentially compromised situation. Agent Diaz slid a business card across the table. When you're ready, there's someone at the Financial Crimes Division who would like to speak with you about a consulting role. Your expertise would be valuable. I took the card, surprised. Working with federal regulators hadn't occurred to me, but it made a certain kind of sense. Who better to help catch financial criminals than someone who had exposed them from the inside? As we left the building, Sarah handed me a folder. The final whistleblower award determination came through. The SEC is awarding you 15% of the penalties assessed against Fairview. I opened the folder and nearly stumbled on the steps. The figure was staggering, over $2 million. That's substantial, I managed. Sarah smiled. That's what happens when you expose a fraud worth hundreds of millions. Congratulations, Maggie. You did the right thing. And for once, it actually paid off. For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to feel something close to vindication. That evening, I called Ryan to share the news. Mom, that's incredible, he said when I told him about the award and the consultant offer. I'm so proud of you. His words meant more to me than all the money in that folder. Epilogue. 1 year later, 1 year later, I stood at the podium of a corporate ethics conference, surveying the room filled with financial professionals, regulators, and compliance officers. My keynote speech on ethical accounting in the age of pressure had drawn an unexpectedly large audience. The pressure to compromise doesn't arrive all at once, I told them. It begins with small requests, rationalizations, and a culture that prioritizes results over methods. By the time someone asks you to commit outright fraud, you've often already been conditioned to say yes. In the front row sat my team from the newly established consulting firm I had founded 6 months earlier, Integrity Financial Advisory. Using my whistleblower award as seed capital, I had created a practice specializing in forensic accounting and ethical compliance systems. Real integrity isn't just saying no to fraud, I continued. It's creating systems where ethical behavior is rewarded and transparency is the default, not the exception. After the speech, as I mingled with attendees, a familiar face approached. Jessica Martinez, my former assistant from Fairview. That was amazing, she said, hugging me. Though I'm a bit biased since I work for the speaker. I smiled. Hiring Jessica as my firm's operations director had been one of my first decisions. Her loyalty during the Fairview scandal had proven her character beyond doubt, and as a single mother to 4-year-old Sophia, she needed a workplace that valued both her professional skills and her personal commitments. How are the new clients coming along? I asked. We just signed Oakwind Technologies, she replied. That makes 14 clients in 6 months. We're going to need more staff. We'll find them, I assured her. The right people who value integrity over convenience. As we chatted, I noticed Richard Parker's name trending on my phone's news alerts. The headline was succinct. Former Fairview CFO sentenced to 8 years for securities fraud. I felt no joy at his downfall, only a quiet confirmation that the system sometimes worked as it should. Justice, like proper accounting, had finally balanced its books. My phone buzzed with a text message from Ryan. Saw the news about Parker. You did it, Mom. You taught me what integrity looks like in action, not just words. That evening, as I sat on my balcony overlooking the city, I reflected on the journey of the past year. My revenge hadn't been about destroying careers or seeking personal vindication. It had been about truth, showing that in the world of finance, as in life, integrity is the only currency that never devalues. In the wake of the scandal, I had not only rebuilt my career, but transformed it into something more meaningful. While Fairview struggled to recover under new leadership, I was helping other companies avoid similar fates. And most importantly, I had lived up to the values I had taught my son. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, but building something better from the ashes of what they took from you. And at 53, I had discovered that it's never too late to start again.